Hello, and welcome to episode 7. And today it's like we're getting the band back together. So, my name's George Holman,
And my name's Ed Wells.
and today we're going to be talking about a topic that impacts probably most of the firms that we would typically work with, but also a lot of the firms that will hopefully be listening to this episode. So, it's regulatory expectations around root cause analysis, best practice, and then also where there isn't that expectation, but there probably is a strong recommendation that root cause analysis could be a good tool to deliver regulatory adherence. So before we jump in, Ed, as you'll now be painfully familiar with, we ask everyone at the beginning of each episode an icebreaker question or a silly question. This episode, the question is, if we'd had today's root cause analysis tools 150 years ago, what is one event that you think might have turned out differently?
Wow. Well, that's quite a list, isn't it? If I'm thinking about root cause analysis as either a preventative tool, George, or let's put it another way, what would we understand more accurately? The immediate one that springs to mind is probably the sinking of the Titanic. And the reason it
Okay.
springs to mind is two reasons. One, there is a podcast which you might have heard of. I think it's got a few more listeners than us, but probably not many, called The Rest is History. And
I am familiar with it. Yep.
yeah. I think if they stick with what they're doing, they're going to go far.
Mm.
They ran a 5-part series on the Titanic, and it is, for people in our line of work, as bad as engrossing as you're going to get. And it really does take the whole event apart, from the socio-economic to the mechanical, to the cultural drivers behind the event. Fascinating, and I would implore anybody that hasn't listened to it to put the time aside to listen to it. But it is a root cause analysis project in the making to use our tools and methods to understand that event. It just would be so incredible. So without doubt, having listened to that and understanding the complexity in that event, it would be that perfect match. What about you, George? You can't get away just asking me.
Oh, the tables have turned. Okay, so what one event would I select? So I'm going to go a little bit less deep than yours, and I'm probably going to say, linking to the previous episode that we recorded with Dave Carolan, actually. And I think I would be looking to use some of the root cause analysis tools, but also methodologies and mindsets around sporting achievement. So I think there's actually a really powerful use case there around, helping teams prepare better, helping teams recover and react better. And actually, a lot of the principles that are there, the reason I say that example, don't just transcend sport. And I think there is a lot of, gold in them hills if we think about the ability to use the ways of working of root cause analysis to really look back at what we've done, forward at what we'd like to do, and improve our chances of winning, not just in sport, but also in business.
Okay, well, look, if you're going to pick a particular event in history, if you wouldn't mind going back to the 1987 FA Cup final when Tottenham lost to Coventry City and putting yourself to work on that, I'd really appreciate that, because I'm still not over it.
I'll just jump in my time machine and sort that out for you,
Okay,
Ed.
thanks.
Okay, so enough of the icebreaker, but hopefully that was just a bit of a fun kind of context set. So today we're going to be talking about regulatory expectations, regulatory requirements, and I think we're going to break this episode into two broad parts, right? So the first is where there is a direct regulatory expectation to use root cause analysis, and the second part is where there are regulatory expectations where we strongly believe that the adoption of root cause analysis, tooling, methodologies and mindsets potentially probably set firms up for greater chances of success. right, as it relates to achieving those requirements. So at a high level, right, root cause analysis, as we know, Ed, is about learning and growth. And I think, we certainly recognise that small firms, large firms can use the ways of working, the methodologies, the mindsets in order to meet expectations. I guess in your conversations with organisations and also regulatory bodies, where are you seeing that direct requirement and emphasis on root cause analysis coming through?
Well, the most direct relationship, and listeners and viewers are going to have to forgive me for being very broad in this answer. Clearly, the most direct relationship is when we are focusing on events that have taken place. So whether it's the FRC and audit quality, or the FCA and consumer duty, the journey that customers go through and how an organisation might manage that and ensure the best outcomes for that customer, or whether we're talking about the health and safety executive, or indeed Ofwat, for example, where the issues might be around safety or environmental governance. In all of those instances, the most direct relationship between root cause analysis and their regulatory expectations is dealing with and understanding an event that's taken place, a negative event. So it could be failures in those expectations around quality, around journey, around safety, and around environmental protection. When we fail at those, then root cause analysis is put forward as the tool. It's the expected tool that any of those organisations governed in that way, regulated in that way, will be expected to demonstrate to do two things, George. And those two things are really blessedly simple, at least in theory. And those two things, of course, are understand and explain what took place in full, and demonstrate that you have solutions in place that will address what you have explained and demonstrated.
And for me, it's always quite interesting when you think about responding to things that have gone wrong, right? And that could be incidents impacting a single firm, incidents and issues impacting multiple firms or markets as a whole. The expectation, I think the dial has been turned from a compliance-driven type RCA exercise to firms using RCA as a strategic learning and improvement process to prevent that risk of recurrence, not just for themselves, but also their peers, their competitors, and the markets as a whole, right? So if I think about, as an example, someone who comes from a financial services background, I would offer up DORA, the regulation that was recently put in place by the European Regulatory Authority. And for anyone who doesn't know, DORA is the Digital Operational Resilience Act. And at its heart was the expectation that firms would take a real a highly scrutinized lens to when things have gone wrong, that they're able to report on when things have gone wrong in a quite granular way, and then they're able to fine tune their response to those things that have gone wrong in a way that doesn't just help them, it also involves their third parties, and that information is being shared not just with the regulators, but also with other market competitors and peers as well. So in the eyes of the regulator, using root cause analysis, and it's not just the tools, although clearly that is something that we talk about, but it is also that way of thinking and that mindset gets you to the level of detail that you need to get to. And that's where the regulators have set their expectations.
Yeah, there's a substantial difference, isn't there, between perhaps understanding something, an event that's taken place on your terms as an organisation internally, and creating that corporate memory. And that's a challenge in its own right. We all know that. but that corporate memory or institutional learning can, and this is, I guess, one of the objectives of our regulatory bodies, is that it's not corporate memory, that it's industry memory or sector memory, that we're learning from the mistakes of others. There is a famous quote from the American stateswoman Eleanor Roosevelt that, we have to learn from the mistakes of others because for no other reason than we probably don't have enough time to make enough mistakes ourselves. So it's important that we do learn, and that is the challenge. But as you can appreciate, George, we've got to learn ourselves before we can share that wisdom elsewhere. That's critical.
It is. And, again, thinking about financial services as an example, if I look now at a UK body, so the FCA, they put out on a semi-annual basis a something called a market watch. And it is essentially a publication that says these are our observations, across the market based on what we're seeing, based on the regulatory submissions and obligations that our participant members have. And in 3 of the last 5 market watches, root cause analysis has been specified. And it's not just specified as a term or something that you might want to consider using, or firms might want to consider using. It is framed as an expectation. So if I take an example, transaction reporting, which is an obligation that firms have to submit records of transactions that have been completed to the regulator on a timely, accurate, and complete basis. There is now a requirement for firms to conduct root cause analysis on where they have identified deficiencies in their own reporting, whether that be the number of fields they've reported, the accuracy of the fields themselves, the data that makes up their reports, all of the above and more. Root cause analysis is now not just a nice to have or something you may wish to consider. It is written in an FCA publication as something that firms need to do in order to improve the quality of what they're submitting.
That would align with recent changes with the FRC, particularly around what they call ISQM1, which is the International Standards on Quality Management in the world of audit. And the most recent thematic review, and I think we're dating back perhaps, let's say, to 2023 here, or maybe even the year before, mentions root cause analysis specifically almost 36 times as a tool to break open the historic ways of thinking. But I think it's worth flagging up at this point, George, and we are talking about 2 approaches or 2 desired outcomes from root cause analysis here. We're talking about a technical review to understand what the mechanics behind a quality failure, for example, or a failure to meet the regulatory expectations in terms of the FCA might be. But they all go much further than that, don't they? Because the machinery of failure, the equipment and the processes that we use is one part of the story. And in fact, with today's technologically driven world, I would argue that very often that is the easiest part to analyze. Now, when you find that process failure or that technology failure, I think what most of the forward-looking stakeholders, and particularly the regulators, would say is that's not where you should stop your analysis. They'd probably make a very strong argument that that's actually where your analysis begins. Because what are the underlying reasons why those aforementioned processes have started to creak or outright failed, or why the technological solutions, which are undoubtedly incredibly powerful, are not providing the efficiencies or the accuracies or indeed the outcomes that we desired when we put them into our large businesses at no small expense. And the reason why that's important is because once you highlight that, you move into a different universe in terms of root cause analysis, because then you move into the universe of culture and people and everything everything else that is much harder to analyze from a technological point of view, it comes back to us human beings at that point. And every single document that I've read from every regulatory body in every sector is very clear to say that that's what we're looking for. What are for example, the firm-wide learnings around culture and around environment, and how people engage? Who's involved in the conversation around the failure? Not the ones and zeros, the data, that's great. And sometimes you're able to turn that data into something a bit more valuable, which is information. I don't think many organizations are short on data or short on intelligence or information, but what is it in terms of wisdom and knowledge? Because to take the conversation back to your initial premise, that the industry-wide sharing, well, we want to share something of value, and value is knowledge and wisdom. It's not data in that sense, and it's not raw intelligence. It has to be contextual, because at that higher level we want to learn from one another. And I think that's what's being pushed. That's the biggest challenge, to actually reveal the underlying drivers of failure rather than just sort of the surface level. It's you're going to have to, if you've got a cliche bell, you might have to ring it now, George, because I'm going to go back to back on a couple of cliches. Well, certainly the primary one is that good problem solvers know what happened, whereas the exceptional problem solvers, the exceptional problem solving firms, know why it happened. And that's the big driver. The what is important, but you need to move beyond that to the why. You can't get to the why if you don't have the what, but you can't just stop at the what happened. And that's difficult, because sometimes it's subjective. It's nebulous. It's messy. It's a term that you use a lot. I've heard you say it a lot. These challenges are messy, and uncovering them is difficult, really difficult.
And I think for me, I'll think about another kind of FCA framed publication recently. So the FCA put out something super interesting, and obviously you and I have had a chance to read it, Ed, and it's around client complaints. So clearly this is not just, the typical narrow lens of, one type of firm. This is really broad brush data and information that at a high level, for instance, said that some firms close 60% of complaints within 3 days. Others manage less than 10%. And the uphold rates of complaints can range anywhere from 20 to 90%. So if I put that in the framing of your comment around the what and the why, what I've just articulated is the what, right? So there is a challenge around client complaints and the ability to deal with those complaints, the ability to resolve them in a satisfactory way that the client is happy. But the metrics and the data are just that. They're metrics. They're facts. They're bits of evidence that we should be using as part of a broader investigation. They're signals. And they're signals of where complexity, miscommunication, process gaps, technology problems, all of the above, probably more things, cause clients and customers harm and cause them to pick up the phone, complain, not be satisfied, etc. And then beyond that, understanding the why, what has happened to lead to these metrics and this information that is being put in front of us, is taking the signals as things that need to be not just improved, but also learning opportunities, things that firms can look at to be able to step back, most probably, and be able to say, we recognize that we have X number of things that we need to address, but also some of that comes down to learning and culture and behavior and the ability to address things in a timely manner through not always the kind of hard things, the technical things, but maybe also the human elements behind it as well. And that is another example of where the FCA, as a regulatory body, has been clear that they expect organisations that are providing service, that are having complaints lodged against them, to not just, put a band-aid over what has happened and move on. It's about addressing the root cause of what has happened to protect customers mainly. Clearly, there's a broader market point that they want markets to be safe and sustainable, but it's about having that customer mindset. And in order to be able to serve that customer in the right way and to remove and reduce and remove those complaints, it's about getting beyond the metrics and the data, getting beyond the what and into the why.
It is, and it's that age-old challenge between symptom management, and root cause analysis, and in reality, both have to be addressed. It'd be very easy for anybody involved in root cause analysis to be dismissive of symptom management, and you hear it all the time. But of course, symptom management is business as usual. And as a consumer, as a customer, I want my symptoms to be managed. I want you to put that right for me. So your desire to uncover the root causes may not be particularly high on my priority list if you're not dealing with the pain, the discomfort that you're causing me. And of course, there's that balance between the two. But perhaps from a more detailed perspective, listening to what you just said in terms of what the regulatory expectations are between the what and the why, I think that if you use root cause analysis methodology to analyze individual events, then you're probably going to be quite good at the what happened. I don't think it's until you take a more holistic approach and look at the trends through a root cause analysis lens, through using root cause analysis tools, and you look at the bigger picture, the cluster, the holistic, at that point you will not only uncover the what, you will uncover the why. The why only reveals itself when you look at multiple cases. It doesn't, because the why often looks insignificant in isolation, but it's when you look at a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, superficially unique events and realize there's a golden thread that's running behind the causes of those however many events you're looking at. And that's the why, isn't it? That's where you reveal that. So the great power, and this is, you hear it from every regulator, is to encourage, in fact, to implore organizations to ring fence the necessary number of people, to put teams together who are dedicated to understanding problems beyond the superficial, beyond the symptom, to make sure those teams have got the necessary time to do that. And the reason time is so important, George, is that most of the problems, the challenges that our leadership and our regulators, our governing bodies want us to analyze using root cause analysis are not small. If they were small problems, we've got a myriad of things in our toolkit that help us deal with small problems. But it's the larger, more complex events that we need to apply these tools and approaches to, because they're very complex, they're extraordinarily expensive, and they cause all sorts of disruption to our consumers and the marketplace. Now, if those problems have taken months, years, or in some cases decades to generate, then we got to be realistic that we're not going to solve them, we're not going to understand them even in 5 minutes. So teamwork is critical. Time is important. And in this day and age, the other really important part of that equation is the technique and the technology and the tools we use to do it. we've got to have some degree of standardization within our sectors for the data that we generate to be in any way meaningful. That's not to say that it's the role of a company like What Caused This, or any other company for that matter, to create a framework of automaton robots that all essentially behave in the same way, sacrifice creativity at the altar of a technocratic approach to problem solving. I don't believe anybody with a combination of intelligence and experience is going to suggest that that's the way to do it. But we've got to have frameworks that are established. And yes, it's great to say root cause analysis is the answer. And of course, we would agree fully in that, because we see that it's demonstrably powerful. And we know that because we see the outcomes of it. But root cause analysis means different things to different people in different sectors and different industries. It is quite a generic term. So it would be my position that we need to just tighten the definition up a little bit, because otherwise where we end up is organizations that don't change their behavior around how they investigate problems. They're doing it exactly the way they have done for the last 30 years. All they've done is changed the name of the process or the name of the file that the outcomes are in from deep dive or category 1 investigation to RCA. Nothing else has changed. And so, to use the old cliche, and I told you you'd need your cliche bell because I'm terrible at it, but that old saying about you can't solve problems using the techniques that generated those problems in the first place. You have to have a different approach. And the reason why many of our regulatory bodies are so insistent that we run root cause analysis is they've seen how it's worked in other sectors. The FRC, the FCA, and related governing bodies have seen how powerful these analysis methods have been in the world of safety, in aviation, in healthcare, and so on. And they're saying, look at the improvement curve, look at the safety and reliability and quality curve over the last 50 years in all of these sectors. Look how they've benefited from learning this way. We could really do that. But what we're in danger of happening is lip service being applied to it, that certain elements of root cause analysis get applied, but not the full fat version, if you know what I mean. So we take it that we'll pick and choose the bits of root cause analysis that look easy to do and are quick and perhaps align with what we're already doing, and we don't make the major change. It's a bit like starting a diet and saying, oh, I like the look of that because I'm a bit, I'm not in great shape at the moment. But that bit about not eating chocolate, I'm not so keen on that bit. And I do like a glass of wine or two at the weekend. And I go to the football on Saturday, and we always go to the pub. And we always have a takeaway on a Sunday. So as long as I can leave those parts of it in, I'm all in. I'm 100% behind this. Show me the way to the promised land. So there is an element of making sure that we've got some idea of what good looks like in terms of root cause analysis, and then I think we can move forward. Those key elements have to come together for an organisation to get the maximum amount of return.
And I think just to build on that, and I hope, by the way, the diet suggestion wasn't being aimed at me. But the
would I do such a thing, George? Okay.
I think actually sometimes firms being able to have an external lens being applied to either their what they think is root cause analysis or what they don't have at the moment can be really powerful, right? And having someone who can, an independent, expert in root cause analysis, being able to come in and help them model a framework, something that is not, one size fits all. It works for their organization. It is tailored to them. It's not purist. It has best practice, yes. It has technology, yes. It has, human-led analysis, yes. But it's not trying to force a square peg into a round hole. And I think having that external view and external support can be really powerful in landing in a place that gives you more confidence as an organisation, but also tying it back to the regulatory point, gives you the ability to be able to show to the regulator that we have a model in place that enables us to respond to risks, to incidents, maybe to use it for opportunities, that follows best practice, but has been designed for our organisation. And that is clearly where we are providing support to organisations, and we welcome, folks to pick up the phone to us or email us to talk about not just, the software and the training around root cause analysis, but also the approach and the model and the how actually with a relatively small amount of effort and design, firms can find themselves in a significantly better place when it comes to the approach towards root cause analysis.
It's got to be approach driven, George, first of all. And you're right to talk about square pegs in round holes. I would say that one of the biggest challenges that sectors like financial services, for example, have had, and it would be true in the world of audit and professional business services as well, is that there are clearly benefits to be taken from having a root cause analysis process. But it's not the same, is it, as if you're in the world of safety or mechanical engineering. And one of the first things that happened was this desire to lift and shift RCA tools and methods that had adapted and grown and evolved to meet the needs of those, if you like, industrial clients, and then saying, look how good those have been for this particular aircraft manufacturer or this pharmaceutical firm. And so all we need to do is just take all of those learnings and move them into your insurance company or your credit provider. Well, it doesn't work. The theory's great, but in practice, it's not fit for purpose because the ecosystem is different. So the biggest challenge, of course, is to take the benefits of that methodology, the benefits of those tools, and apply them in a way that is flexible enough to build on the pre-existing knowledge and expertise in those organizations, because they're already good at solving problems. It's just pushing it that extra way, isn't it? And so there is no cookie cutter approach. There can't possibly be. But there are frameworks that can be adapted that are massively powerful and help those organizations make huge leaps moving forward within an RCA framework that keeps every stakeholder delighted, whether that's senior leadership, whether that's the regulator, or ultimately, and arguably most importantly, the customer.
And if I think, Ed, you made a comment there around having the framework in place to enable you to do certain things moving forward. And that is a really nice lead into kind of the second broad kind of topic around using root cause analysis, where it may not be directly specified by the regulator, but actually it's going to give you a superpower to deliver regulatory adherence. And the example that I think about is there has, again, recently been a publication by the FCA that is very direct in its expectations, and it relates to the move to T+1 securities settlement in the UK. So quite heavily financial services framed, but this should hopefully explain why we feel that applying root cause analysis to delivering on your regulatory kind of day one requirements can be so powerful, right? So the FCA sent a memorandum to compliance officers, and although the current line in the sand for day one adherence is not until 2027, the FCA were really clear that they expect by the end of this year, so by the end of 2025, that firms should not just have familiarised themselves with requirements, that they need to have a plan in place. And then they went one step further in the memorandum to say that firms in this period should be carrying out, and this is me quoting now, end-to-end reviews of their trading, clearing, and settlement arrangements, and should identify existing manual processes and blockages that require enhancement or fixing. End quote. But for me, if I now apply root cause analysis thinking to that, if you have the framework in place that works for your organization, that is a prime area for using RCA to understand the risks, the issues, the opportunities that can give firms a massive head start in meeting the obligations that they have that are coming down the pipeline. And I always used, you said that one of your favorite sayings of mine is talking about messy things. One of my other favorite sayings is measure twice and cut once. And this is a prime candidate for that kind of mindset, where this is a huge change for many organizations. There is a real danger that they could chart a course in completely the wrong direction. They might be thinking they're doing the right thing, but it could take them to the wrong destination. And then you're going to have the costly, time-consuming process of reversing back. And that could even put day one adherence at risk for your organization. So I guess I share that as a real life example of where I and we really see applying root cause analysis thinking and process early in the adoption of regulatory requirements turns the dial more in your favor in terms of being able to hit being, adherent with the requirements on day one.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpick there. I think the first thought that came into my mind is that compliance officers must have been very naughty boys and girls to be getting that for Christmas. Secondly, I would agree with what you said in terms of, okay, where does root cause analysis as a methodology offer value added? Is that a fair term? Is that a way to summarize your question or your premise?
I would even build slightly to say it is increasing quite significantly your chances of being successful.
So it's very interesting. So George, as you know, I do a fair amount of, public speaking and presentations. And something that I often do at the start of a engagement is I will ask the room to raise their hands if they know what root cause analysis is, if they've heard of it, if they know, broadly speaking, what it does. And typically you would expect, depending on the audience, a high majority of hands to go up. I'll then ask them to leave their hands up if they've been directly involved in root cause analysis activity. So they might not have led projects, but they've contributed to them. And typically a good number of hands stay up. Normally we're about 50% by then with the sorts of audiences I have. I'll finish that little song and dance routine by asking them to leave their hands up if they've ever done any root cause analysis work on either an opportunity they could improve or a success that they've had. And typically every hand will go down. And so that tells us where the majority of RCA activity takes place. And it's in understanding what's gone wrong, which of course is very valuable, isn't it? Understanding why events have gone wrong is valuable. But it's no different to if you only understand what went well, which is known as survivor bias. You're actually getting failure bias. And so your data set is going to be a limited percentage of the important data that you need. And of course, I think what you're describing there is if we understand our routes to success, our routes to goals and opportunities well, then meeting those types of requirements going forward is going to be a lot easier. That's for certain. And RCA, I mean, everybody that we know that embeds good RCA tools and technology and ultimately a good RCA mindset quickly finds it very easy to apply that approach to their successes as their failures. And that's that golden circle. That's where you join the circle at that point. It's like, right, our same approach is giving us an understanding of failure and of risk and of course opportunity as well.
And I think also from a regulatory perspective, I've been involved in quite a lot of kind of regulatory implementations and also remediation programs. And a lot of regulators talk about, and this is my words, not theirs, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, but not wanting to be blindsided. So
Sure.
not wanting to have, you get to a week before day one and a firm picks up the phone and says, actually, we don't really have a plan, or our plan is not great, or we've had this, thing missing, or clearly there is always an element of things can go wrong in the run up to, the day one adherence with a regulation. Right. A lot changes in typically what is like an 18-month, 2-year window of
Sure.
time. But if there are things that just point to the fact that an organization has not prepared very well, or they've not planned very well, or they've not asked the right questions early, that is typically not looked upon with such a positive light. And the dial then gets turned more towards scrutiny rather than an understanding that, tech may have been delayed or something might have slipped slightly to the right. So I guess my recommendation for any firm who is looking at not just T+1 in the UK, but also other types of regulatory obligation that might be coming down the pipe is, the old adage, failing to prepare is preparing to fail, right?
Yeah.
And if you take the proper time and due diligence and approach to analyzing what needs to be done using root cause analysis tools, technology, mindset, approach, again, you're tilting the odds more in your favor of being successful, and at the very least, the regulator having a favorable view of what you're trying to do, and actually that will result in better relations, better conversations, and also typically better outcomes.
Well, you slightly stole my thunder, because all I was going to add to that was that the unacceptable position is that it's obvious that you set yourself up to fail. And every senior stakeholder, particularly the regulator, they're not demanding perfection, are they, George? They're wanting you to show best practice, to set
Absolutely.
yourself up to succeed, so that you build an environment where there is likely to be a reduction in the quantity, scale, frequency of issues. And that's going to come from a culture of openness and a free sharing of information and learning, and demonstrates that genuine commitment to continuous improvement. Now, these challenges are very complex. They involve lots of functions within our organization. And in that sense, they do reflect the classic RCA environment of complexity, where RCA methods, particularly the visual tooling that enables us to map the causal pathways that are the arterial system within our businesses, where any blockage or any failure or any fault or misunderstanding can have a catastrophic impact on the likelihood of us being able to deliver. And you don't get that through being sat on your own in an office, and you certainly don't get it from huge data sets. You get it from your best people coming together, sharing their wisdom and knowledge, supported by hard data, of course, because RCA, any analysis method, needs to be evidence-based. But that way of working RCA as a strategic tool, I mean, that's the key element, and that's what is woven within these messages. Is you're trying to use those root cause analysis methods to make sense of all that data that you have, and that's a strategic tool. That's human driven. Sure, our data supports it, and I'm certain that AI supports that model. But ultimately, our wisdom and our knowledge is within our people. And they are the people that are going to need to come together using the right tools to begin to make sense of the complexity and the interaction between all of the superficially independent parts that come together to create the system that either leads to success or failure.
So that was really well put, Ed. And I think my only build on that would be, I've actually known for regulators to take the approach of offering support where, and it might be through industry initiatives or through direct engagement with organizations, where a firm shows that they've taken the right steps themselves, right? And I would certainly include RCA in planning and preparedness activity right in that category, right? So being able to go to a regulator and in saying, here is my plan, here is the approach that we have taken to construct this plan. Obviously, you're going to have your risks, your assumptions, your issues, your dependencies overlaid with that, but being able to also point to your workings, being able to say, this is where we've landed and this is why we've landed here, and this is the justification for why we think these are the things we need to do, not do, the approach we need to take, etc. That is where you're going to get more of a open dialogue, more of a trusted relationship, and if there is the need for support, that's going to be more forthcoming if that upfront approach has been taken in the right way.
Yeah, and that's why the very best RCA methods are always visual in terms of how they map out either what happened or what we intend to do. Because it's not just, if we take it from a problem point of view, it isn't the individual things that happen that necessarily matter. It's the order in which they happened, isn't it? And it's how the things that happened impacted other things in that scenario. It's the interconnectivity. It's a system-based approach, and it's the same in terms of improvement and opportunity. We all know there's things that need to be done, but in what order and with what emphasis? And those elements are absolutely critical. And if we use classic RCA methods, particularly the visual part of the analysis, which I think is often missed, but is actually the critical engine room of genuinely successful root cause analysis. I'd argue that anything that fits the criteria of RCA has to have a visual element in terms of its analysis. I just don't believe that drop downs and matrix and a matrix and things like that are going to do it, because we need to see the interconnectivity before we act. The journey, the causal journey that took us from good to bad, or takes us from bad to good, it makes no difference, it is critical. The pathways have to be revealed visually, pictorially. We need to be able to see that. And if we embed that in our planning, going back to your point, it's transparent, it's challengeable. To use your term, I'm able to show my working out. And our best people can look at that from a strategic point of view, in the same way that we do with project management. There's a parallel there, isn't there? Project management, problem solving, continuous improvement. The frameworks are all there. We know what good looks like, but we can't shortcut it. We have to do it well. So I agree, and that's all we're being asked to do. It's very achievable.
Yeah. So look, we've covered an awful lot of ground, right? And I guess part one, loosely, was around regulators' direct expectations around utilization of RCA, and where we shared some examples of that, and then we moved a little bit into the utilization of RCA as a means to achieving regulatory adherence and also tilting the odds more in your favour of landing in the right place.
I think, George, I mean, I'll jump in there because I think something that's worth flagging up before we conclude this conversation is that a number of elements that we put into part 2, I think we're finding now that actually from a regulator's perspective, they're in part 1. If you read now, there is a growing emphasis on using your root cause analysis tools and skill set for improvement, for learning, for cultural change. And so there's a coming together of those two things. That is most certainly the direction of travel, and that's clearly documented. So if we want to have that adherence, and this isn't just about adherence and compliance, important as that is, it's about improvement. It's about doing the best things we can do for our people and our customers. There is a clear route that, and these tools will help you achieve all of that, and they'll sit beautifully within the other activities that are taking place. They are, to my mind, an accelerator of many of the activities that are already taking place.
And I think actually that's a conversation that we would welcome with people, right? Is if organisations, executives want to get to a lower level of detail of understanding how actually this conversation could apply specifically to their organisation, that's a conversation we can have with them. We can really help them to understand how some of those building blocks can be put in place, what it might entail, that gives that pathway towards having that approach, that mindset, the tooling in place. And I'm pretty confident that organizations will start to see benefit and time to insight really quite quickly. It's an evolution rather than a revolution for most organizations, and actually it's putting in place the right foundational elements that can just help again to turn that dial towards doing the right things, doing them in the right way. And it's something that we can help with, right?
Definitely it is. It all starts with, like we said at the beginning, it all starts with an approach. It all starts with mindset, and everything builds from there. A root cause analysis mindset is going to push people forward and provide the foundations we need to build on. So absolutely it is. There's lots of resource out there of which we're honoured and privileged to be one of them for many people.
Yeah. So one takeaway then, Ed, if I had to put you on the spot, what would be, if people were to take one thing away from this episode in particular, what would it be for you?
Don't be scared. Don't be scared of root cause analysis. It's not a scary, technical, difficult thing to implement at all. With the correct approach and with the necessary support, as you said, you can turn the dial pretty quickly and meet obligations primarily and build from there. So there's nothing to be fearful of at all.
Okay. For me, it would be, and I'm going to go back, I'm going to weave in a few of my examples from the past. I'm a big Back to the Future fan, and I think of, I think it's Back to the Future 2, where he gets a copy of the Sporting Almanac, and he then goes back in time, but it falls into the wrong hands, but bets a place that, you're more sure of outcomes. And that's my key takeaway from this is, how can you put in place something that makes you more certain that the outcomes you're going to achieve are going to give you the things that you thought they were going to give you? And, whilst I'm not saying what caused this is a sporting almanac, what it does give you and what we are able to provide is that certainty, that assurance that when you're looking at problems, challenges, opportunities, you are more likely, by putting in place an approach, a mindset and tools, to deliver the best outcomes for yourselves, your clients and broader markets.
Absolutely. Well said, George.
So we'll leave it there. Thank you as ever, Ed, for your time and your insights, and thank you to everyone for tuning in.
Well, George, thanks for making time for the conversation. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Calls for Thought, powered by What Caused This. If today's conversation made you think differently, visit our website or drop us an email to learn more about uncovering the real causes behind complex challenges. We would also really appreciate if you would subscribe, follow, share, repost and comment. Your engagement really helps. So until next time, keep asking what caused this.